Dr. Prendergast has put it out in writing on several occasions, on a daily basis actually, is that the quarantine has changed from 14 to 10 days. So I'd be more than happy to find a place online on our website to note that. But the protocols have not changed. The overwhelming majority are the same. There have been some slight changes based upon recommendations from the Department of Health, and that would be the reduction from the 14-day to the 10-day quarantine period.
Thank you. And I just want to mention that anybody who writes a question submits it. If you are not satisfied or if you have further questions, you're more than welcome to go ahead and contact the appropriate administrator.
Sorry, Mrs. Berkowitz, just one more thing. There was
Sure.
another change that was not in our original plan. They did change the travel protocol. So the Department of Health and the CDC did change the quarantine guidelines for travel. So if somebody travels out of state, they can exit quarantine early. As long as they test within 3 days of leaving the state that they traveled to, and quarantine for 3 days when they come back, and then test on the 4th day, they can then exit quarantine early. So we can find a place to put that on our website as well. Again,
Sure.
we communicated that in writing and verbally on several occasions, but we can reinforce that by placing it on the website.
Great. Okay, next question. With an eye toward providing activities that support the community, have the schools looked into partnerships across the active organizations? At the moment, my 5-year-old has 2 hours of remote school a day. Could the schools partner with, for instance, the Cub Scouts to further provide educational opportunities? I would be grateful to see something like this happen or know if it's ongoing. Ms. Newman, would you tackle that one perhaps, because we're looking at a young child?
Certainly. Thank you, Mrs. Berkowitz, and good evening, everyone. We certainly do advocate for and promote partnerships with reputable, well-regarded, established organizations in our community, such as the Cub Scouts. And when asked to do so, we send out flyers and brochures on behalf of organizations advertising specific programs for our children. That part is easy, and we are always happy to help. What we cannot do, however, due to time constraints during the school day, is schedule overviews for our students from program representatives, because the number of organizations that would likely ask us to do so would be numerous. That said, if an organization were interested in doing that, maybe a school's PTO would be a good vehicle to consider to offer delivery of such presentations to our parents, who can then decide what is best for their child or children in terms of participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last question that we have in advance: why didn't the in-person elementary school programs go remote for the first week after the holiday break? Do you think that would have kept everyone safer? Dr. Prendergast, would you tackle that one, please?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Berkowitz. Well, obviously, keeping our schools safe for in-person instruction has been our priority since we've reopened schools in September. And any decision to close schools or switching to remote instruction for any period of time would be made in consultation with the Nassau County Department of Health. It's also important to note that when we're in a position where we have to completely close schools and revert an entire school to a remote instruction model, we're obligated also to report any of those school closures to the New York State Education Department. Thankfully, for the most part, students and staff have remained diligent in following our safety protocols, and that has keep our infection rate lower than many Long Island school communities. Our members in our community have followed the guidelines. They're staying home if they don't feel well, and that obviously they're keeping in touch with their healthcare providers. I am very much mindful though of the infection rates, and if we were ever in a situation where our infection rates were to rise to a significant level and we found ourselves in a situation where we'd be unable to safely staff our classes with teachers, then we might have no other choice but to move to remote instruction. But it will always be my goal, where we can, to keep schools open for children for in-person instruction wherever possible. But of course, doing so in a very safe manner. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to note one thing also. Many of the letters that go home, because I get a copy of them as well, do indicate that the person hasn't been in school for a while. So that's a good thing to note. And I think that helps perhaps with not keeping a transmission of the virus higher. Items 4A and B, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Everybody's on mute. You've got to unmute yourselves.
So
Are there any
moved.
nays?
So move.
Okay, any nays?
No, no nays.
Okay, we're almost at the end, people. Oh, wait, we've done all this. Are there any other questions that
Yes,
people have submitted?
yes,
Ms.
Mrs.
Langell
Berkowitz.
and Dr. Lander, I'm going to ask the two of you at this point to go ahead and let us know.
Shall I read the questions, Mrs. Berkowitz?
Yes, please.
Okay. In determining what is acceptable and unacceptable risk with sports, is there a medical professional advising the school district?
I can start with that one, and then Dr. Hickey, you can certainly join in as well. The decision to run athletics came to us from the state education department, as you know, as well as the governor's office with regard to the executive orders. The Nassau County Section 8 Council has opportunities and council representation, excuse me, from the medical field. I cannot tell you who the actual doctor is. I'm not aware. But I can tell you that decisions are made in consultation with Section 8, with the Department of Health. And we're being very mindful in terms of the types of sports that are being shared with us that can be offered at this time. There are opportunities for some possible instances for maybe conditioning of some sorts or limited opportunities, but there are no opportunities at this point in time for those identified sports to actually have a winter season. Dr. Hickey, is there anything else maybe you might want to add?
Just want to add that during the reopening process, we did have some great help from two physicians in the district, Dr. Yu Cassieri and Dr. Peter Chang. They were both very helpful in opening, in suggestions for our opening plan. So I'd be more than happy to reach out to both of them, get some input from them so that I could share that with Mr. Zawatson.
Good, thank you. And perhaps we'll also look to see if there's anything else that could be done.
Okay,
Next,
then-
another question?
yes. I was wondering why an email was not sent out letting parents know of the option giving students to be remote for 10 days after the break, being excused absence, which at first they said it was unexcused. Can you tell us what is considered excused and unexcused? For some situations, it's a little bit skewed.
So to start with, if I might answer this, to start with, the definition of an excused absence and an unexcused absence is defined by law. It's not defined by the school district. And so things that might be excused are illness, religious purpose, family illness, death in the family, etc. Those have always been excused absences. There are times that parents choose to take their children on vacations. And when a parent takes a child on vacation, that is an unexcused absence. Such unexcused absences are not held against the child, and although not required to by law, teachers often provide assignments to students when the family has taken a trip for some reason, unique or special occasion. So excused and unexcused is defined by law. There's a new series of coding that is required this year for attendance, because we're now required to code as to whether or not students are present and whether they're present virtually or present physically, or whether or not our students are engaged in asynchronous instruction on a particular day. So the coding became more challenging, and the state provided us with those codes after the start of the school year. So threw another monkey wrench into the system that way. Up until, and if you'll recall, at the end of September, I did send a letter out to parents that explained that if a student was registered to be present in school at the secondary level, because this applies to secondary students, really not elementary students. At the secondary level, if a student who was supposed to be in school was not present in school, they would be marked absent, even if they chose to and were welcomed to attend virtually, because our teachers have been streaming live. So we've allowed students to attend, we've allowed them to complete assignments. We have not held it against them with any consequences if they were technically unexcused by definition of law and yet attending class virtually on a day that they were scheduled to be physically present. We did not send a letter out about the 10 days, 10 calendar days following a school vacation period, because we actually are in consultation with our school district's attorneys about that particular circumstance. Because how can you mark a student present when they are not physically present and registered to be physically present? And we were given the opportunity to then take advantage of the New York State and the Department of Health assessment that has gone from 14 days to 10 days, that if there is a concern or not following the guideline for COVID, that a person can be absent for that 10-day period. So those parents who expressed a concern and were in touch with the school and let the school know that their child, they were concerned about the spread of COVID for the time immediately after a vacation period, those parents were told, we now have a mechanism to code you as being virtually present. The students were coded in that way. But again, although it's a technical coding, nothing was done that hurt the students in terms of that time. They were allowed to attend class. They were allowed to complete assignments. There was no disciplinary consequence. So that's something that took place then. Again, the reason that no letter went out was that the parents had made this choice already, and we were getting in touch with those that had made the choice on an individual basis. I will also say that there has been a question about whether or not we should do this following the February and following the April vacations. And the answer is that it's too soon to determine whether or not we should do that, because right now we don't know what the transmission rates will be a month from now, and certainly not 3 months from now. So therefore, we've not ever put a student in a place where they're going to lose out on their instruction. We've never given them a situation where they're going to lose out on earning their credit and being able to complete their work. And we're following the state guidelines as best we can in terms of recording the legality and presence of students in school, or whether or not their absences are excused or unexcused. By the way, the only reason that we can do this at the secondary level is that there is virtual instruction that is taking place in our classes 6 through 12 secondary level on an alternate day basis. The option for students to be recorded as virtually present does not exist at the elementary level, because there is no ability to transfer back and forth at the elementary level, because there are no cameras sending out virtual instruction at the elementary level for a class that a student was already in.
Is that it?
I'm sorry to run on so long.
We
I'm
have
just
two.
saying.
We have two more questions.
Okay.
Okay, I commend Rebecca Sassooni for putting out a thoughtful message to the district following the attack on the U.S. Capitol. However, Great Neck was the only district in Nassau County that did not share a communication with parents. Why did Great Neck make this decision, given the significance of this event and its potential impact on children?
I will take that. Thank you, Mrs. Langell. Certainly the events at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. last week invoked a wide range of emotions throughout this country and abroad. Our secondary principals and or classroom teachers did communicate with parents in an appropriate manner. And they also provided opportunities to assist parents in ways in which they could support their children during this challenging period of time. Obviously, it's very important that we look to find ways to assist children to engage with others, certainly who have different points of view, and be able to have these kind of delicate conversations in respectful and peaceful ways. Obviously, parents, you are your child's first teacher, and we know that there may be times when you may need assistance in terms of how to respond to these myriad of questions that children may ask of you. And I do know that our building administrators did offer resources to parents in the event that they need any additional support. And of course, I would remind parents always, please do not hesitate to avail yourselves of our mental health staff. If you ever need any guidance or resources at any time, not only regarding the incident that occurred last week, but any other instances where you may find it difficult to navigate these types of challenging conversations with your children.
Thank you. Next question.
Okay, the last question is, what is the exact definition of prolonged period of time as stated in the district's letters regarding confirmed cases?
Dr. Hickey?
Could you restate the question, Kaniko? I didn't hear what you were saying.
Okay, what is the exact definition of prolonged period of time as stated in the district's letters?
So when we put, in our letters early on, we were given guidance not to be too specific as to not identify a person. So we, if you look back in the history of the letters, we've used some different terms. If you look at several days, that's in there a lot. That's 3 or more days. And then once we hit 5 days or longer, we use prolonged period of time.
And Dr. Hickey, many times the children who may have ultimately been testing positive may have already been on quarantine, which is why they had been absent for a prolonged period of time as part of the quarantine process.
So if you look at the letter that went out right after vacation, when we got back, there were several people. All of those students, all of those teachers that were mentioned, the COVID experience happened over the break. So that's a perfect example of that.
Okay, Mrs.
Good.
Berkowitz, that concludes our Q&A.
Okay. Well, that's it then. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, February 24th. It'll be our first student recognition. Unfortunately, it won't be the way they usually are held. The meeting is at 7:30. We go back to 7:30 meetings. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So move.
Are there any nays?
No nay. No nays.
Thank you. Some of us have our mute buttons on, and that's the problem then. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Aye.
Good night, be well.